All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us. This is Finding the Middle, Inclusive by Design. So this is a joint program brought to you by APA Chicago Metro Section, as well as the CNU Illinois chapter. And I'm going to ahead and share screen real quick just to talk about chapter-only membership real quick, and then we'll get going and hand it off to the real program. But just want to let everyone know chapter-only membership is a great way to support the Illinois chapter. Lets you take advantage of sessions like this at a discounted rate, and is something that we're really trying to encourage people to take advantage of. Go ahead and share screen, that would help. We've got a state conference coming up October 6th through 8th, so check out our website, ilapa.org, for more details on that. And then we've also got kind of a second housing session that really deals more with kind of finance and how you make things happen from the implementation side, that will be coming probably in November. So that'll be kind of a paired with the session we're going through today. And so with that said, I'm going to hand it off to Gary, who's kind of leading the CNU Illinois chapter this year, and has been great to partner with on pulling the session together. So Gary, take it away.
Thanks, Brandon. Hi, everyone. As Brandon said, my name is Gary Scott. I'm the chairperson of CNU Illinois, the Illinois chapter of the Congress for the New Urbanism. We're glad to be partnering with APA Illinois CMS on this session today. So thank you for joining us. We'll be having quite a bit of content here in the next hour and a half. So I would request that if you have any questions, to put them into the Q&A feature or in the chat box below, and we'll definitely be reviewing those when we get to the Q&A panelist part at the end. Also, please keep your microphone off and of any distractions while you're on this as well. With that being said, we might as well get ahead and get going. So I'd like to introduce myself just briefly. I am, in addition to being the chairperson of CNU Illinois, I'm a project manager at Pace Suburban Bus in the Paratransit Division. I'm also on the board of the Congress for the New Urbanism. I am very passionate about communities and building great places. So next, I'd like to introduce Emily Tallon. She's the professor of urbanism at the University of Chicago. She's been, before University of Chicago, she's been at the Arizona State University and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She has a PhD in urban geography from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Her research is devoted to urban design and urbanism, especially the relationship between the built environment and social equity. She has several books, including New Urbanism and American Planning, Design for Social Diversity, Urban Design Reclaimed, City Rules, and Neighborhood. She's also the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and is a fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners, AICP. Thanks for joining us, Emily. Diane Limas. Diane Limas is the leader and board president of Communities United, a grassroots intergenerational racial justice organization in Chicago, developing grassroots leadership and building collective power to achieve racial justice and transformative social change by advancing health equity, affordable housing, education justice, youth investment, immigrant rights, police accountability, and shifting resources from the criminal justice and juvenile justice systems into restorative justice alternatives. I know she has a lot of experience in this field, and I cannot wait to hear her speak today. As well, we have Heather Barnes. She is a Roseland community organizer and co-housing organizer at Communities United. She's a steering committee member of the Chicago Justice League and the chairwoman of the Housing, Education, and Economic Development Committee, HEED, H-E-E-D, of the Rebirth of Greater Roseland. She also lives in Roseland and is the owner-occupant of a two-flat home and MSW candidate at the Loyola School of Social Work. Now I'd like to pass the baton to Jacky to introduce herself.
Thanks so much, Gary. I'm Jacky Wells, a project manager with House of Levine Associates, a consulting firm out of Chicago. We specialize in community planning, economic development, and urban design. So my time with the firm has really focused on working with communities to update their zoning, subdivision, and sign ordinances. And with that work, I have worked in countless communities that are working to preserve missing middle housing as well as develop new missing middle housing. So I'm very excited to be a part of bringing this session together and very excited to learn from Emily, Diane, and Heather about the strategies that they've implemented. Pass it off to Rolf.
I'm Rolf Pendahl. I'm a professor and department head at the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I'm really glad to be joining you today and also to be working to put together this panel with Jacky and Gary, and I really appreciate the three panelists we have coming for you today. I want to make a slight update on the directions for you all. Please do hold the questions until the end, but the Q&A function in this webinar is not turned on, so please, if you have questions or comments, just go ahead and type them in the chat and we will keep track of those. As we're getting started, since there's almost 50 people in the audience today, we thought it would be a good idea for us to have a couple of polls to start out, just to see where you're at and to get a sense of, to allow you to get a sense of one another as we're getting started. So the first poll, and the panelists are allowed to vote too if you'd like to. The first poll is just a setup here. So I'm going to launch it now. I'm going to give you a minute or two to look through it, and I'll be watching as things come through. And so far we have, yeah, I'll just be watching the progress on the polling, and then I'll be back to report the results. Okay, great. I'm going to end the polling, and now I'm going to share the results with you. So I'm not sure what this looks like on your screen, but on each of the first three questions, the modal answers are somewhere in the middle. Somewhat familiar. There's some middle housing in the community already. Not much of it is threatened by gentrification, and then not very much of it is threatened by abandonment. And by the setup of these questions, you get an idea about what we're focusing on here. Given the expertise of and the issues that are addressed by Communities United, as well as Professor Talon's expertise, we really wanted to make sure that we covered both of these questions. Do you need more of it, and is it hard to get it there? And do you have it, but are people leaving it because there are neighborhoods in Chicago where that's true, as we'll hear in a minute from Diane and Heather. And so it's good here to have such a nice range of conditions, ranging from people who come from communities where there isn't very much, and they're trying to get more, perhaps, or trying to explore that idea, to those that have a lot that aren't under threat, and some that are in fact under threat from either gentrification or abandonment. So thanks very much. You see where we're at now. I think that means that the pitch of this panel is going to be right on target for the breadth of this audience, but I do hope that you'll share your questions in the chat as we go along. At this point, I'm going to kick it off by inviting Emily to begin with her presentation. And we're calling the first presentation the blueprint, and the second one is the playbook. The blueprint is about what is middle housing and how do we get it, and what are the benefits of it, I mean. And then the second part is the playbook, which is how do you get it built or saved if you want it and don't have it, or you have it and you might be losing it. And so Emily's going to speak to the first, the blueprint. Diane and Heather will be speaking to the second, the playbook. Emily, it's all yours.
Okay, thanks so much, Rolf, for that great introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. I've got everybody see that okay? My opening one. So I have been tasked with just kind of presenting a sort of introductory framework for this issue. How do we think about it? Where does it come from? I'm just kind of summarizing a lot of work that other people have done, really. I want to kind of frame this as a discussion of the what, the why, and the how, without getting into too many specifics, but just to give you a way to kind of think about what's been going on with this. So the what is sort of the scope of the problem. What is this housing type, and to what degree are we losing it? What do we know about that? The why is the question of, more fundamentally, why do we need this type of housing? And then the how is what can be done to preserve and get more of this housing. You know, the new urbanists have been very involved in this issue for quite a while now. I think it goes back at least 15 years, maybe longer than that. And the reason that it's often termed the missing middle, originally it was conceptualized as being a problem of, in the US in general, there is a lot of single family housing, and then there are high-rise apartment buildings. And what we are lacking is this middle range of housing types. So the idea was, you know, there's this whole realm of built form between detached single family housing and high-rise homes, and we need to get that back. What that consists of exactly very much varies by what location you're in. Now, I want to give a special shout out to the work of Dan Parallac and Opticos Design, because they have really been at the forefront of this and have done amazing amounts of research, documenting missing middle housing types, writing the book. I encourage you to go to their website, which has a lot of resources and materials. And, you know, his website that he's put together has just been a really great resource. He actually defines missing middle as having 4 to 8 units in a building, as being the primarily, that's the building form that he's talking about with missing middle. Most missing middle building types are 2 to 2.5 stories, with the exception of a cottage court, and they only have a maximum of 1 unit, one off-street parking space per unit. That's important to know. On the upper end, he does go up to something in the realm of 12 units in a building, and that's a little bit on the higher end of things, especially for Chicago. He also makes a case that accessory dwelling units, ADUs, should not be considered missing middle housing types. That's a different kind of a thing. They are important, but they're not really what we're talking about here. Again, in his at his website, he's done just a lot of work documenting all these different types and giving us a lot of details about what these types look like, all the specifications for these different types in different parts of the country. Here you can get all the, you know, the typical density, et cetera. And what I really like is he also has what he calls ideal specifications. So he takes all that data on these different housing types in this middle range, and then he thinks about, well, if it was an ideal form that we're trying to replicate, what exactly would those specifications be? And he divides this into 2 groups, front-loaded buildings and alley-loaded buildings, and gives you all the ideals there. This is the 4-plex type, and where you would put the parking, an ideal situation. Here's an alley loaded. This is actually a multiplex. This can be, the number of units here that's being shown are 12 units, so this is a little bit bigger. He also makes the case that, this is again from Opticos, that what's been going on just historically is that these missing middle building types used to represent a much higher proportion of all the building in the country, and it's just been losing its share, and that's a problem. The other main source for you that well, there are many sources on this topic, but I want to give a shout out as well to what the folks over at the DePaul Housing Institute have been doing. You might have seen a couple of their recent reports. These two recent studies have a wealth of data in them, and they are really focusing on the 2 to 4 unit building type, which is interesting because it's a little bit less than what the missing middle website and Dan Parallac have been talking about. And the reason for that, I actually asked one of the authors, is that they find that in Chicago, it's the 2 to 4 unit building type that has the most affordability, and therefore is the type that is should be preserved. And here's just I just have 2 slides of takeaways from these reports. There's a lot more there. But basically, here's what's been going on. In Chicago, that percent of units that are in that building type of 2 to 4 units for Chicago as a whole, it's 26%. And keep in mind that Chicago as a whole, many of you must already know, has a lot of single family housing in it. It's, Chicago is, includes a lot of suburban area, is my point. But so while Chicago as a whole is 26%, if you start to get into different kinds of tracts around the city, you find that these percentages are much higher. For example, in Latinx tracts, in majority Black tracts, and for the majority white tracts, it's much lower percentage. Here's the other key takeaway. That we have been losing in all areas in Chicago, and I realize this is not just about Chicago, this is about Illinois, but be that as it may, what's happening in Chicago, all areas are losing this building type, but here's what I find really interesting is that they're losing it for different reasons depending on where you are. In higher cost neighborhoods, this is about conversion to single family dwellings, which is absolutely tragic because these are often neighborhoods that are high opportunity neighborhoods with good transit access. And so we're losing density in places, in exactly the kind of places we should be having density. In lower cost neighborhoods, what's been happening is we're losing this building type to demolition. And the tragedy there is that instead, units are getting replaced with commercial land uses or vacant land. It's just becoming vacant land, or it's becoming something else, not housing. So let me just get into the why of all of this. In doing a little research to how to present all this material, I discovered, and it occurred to me that different folks have different reasons as to why they think middle housing is important. And I find that there's kind of a market developer angle to this. There are the new urbanists who are really focused on the walkability aspects of middle housing. And then there's the affordability folks. And the beauty of this, of course, is that all of these things are interconnected and they are in sync. And so that's a good thing. But there's a market side to this. Developers talking about how there's a mismatch between housing stock that is getting built and the actual shifting demographics and what is actually needed. And we need to get these things more in sync. I found this graphic from the National Association of Realtors that I thought was really interesting. And they are making the point that if you look at these mismatched categories, the point here is that even after the pandemic was in full swing, we still have a very high mismatch between folks living in detached homes who wish they could live in middle housing. It went from 22% to 20% in the height of the pandemic. So all this, panic about how, everybody wants a single family home is not necessarily correct. And then there are the folks that are really emphasizing the walkability aspects of this housing type. And this is all about the fact that, what middle housing does, it creates a moderate density that can support public transit, that can support walkability. You get walkable communities, and it's, the list goes on of all the benefits of that walkable urbanism kind of fabric that is created with that middle housing. The affordability piece, there's a lot of research on this, how this middle housing type is sort of naturally affordable, even without a subsidy per se. And it can be built at lower cost, have greater net efficiency than high-rise apartment buildings. It doesn't have to have corridors or elevators or fire stairs necessarily. It can be built out of wood and not concrete. Smaller housing units can mean smaller mortgages, lower rents. The list goes on about all these affordability aspects of this middle housing type. And here's a graphic I found from a architecture studio, WC Studio, just talking about, what is this total bar of costs for construction and land, and how with this middle housing type, it really is a smaller set of costs that you're dealing with. There's also a framing, and this is again from Opticos, a framing that says, in this, you have this sort of subsidized housing approach to getting affordability, and then you have the YIMBY approach, which is just build more, and those are sort of the barbells of affordable housing. The middle housing type is creating this middle kind of urbanism that is, again, it's called naturally affordable, for lack of a better term. So bottom line goal here, we need small scale attached housing in high opportunity neighborhoods. So I just have a couple more slides. So the how of this, my other colleagues, panelists are going to get a lot more into this. But I think that what's interesting is there is this different kind of focus, as I mentioned. Sometimes it's about the need to preserve and have subsidy, and that's that's very different from the impulse that's more about we need to build more of this. And actually there's a little bit of a red flag here in that we have to think about the fact that new construction tends to be more expensive than existing preserved, housing types. So as we're pushing to build more of this missing middle, what is that really doing to affordability? Let's see. This is the whole, I guess I wanted to bring up this other point that's sort of, I don't think we're going to get too much into this right now, but this is sort of a new urbanist thing, that a lot of this middle housing that's being built, and this building I'm showing is not a great example because it's a little bit more than middle, but there's a lot of critique about the design of these new constructed buildings in this middle category, that they're awful. They're not contributing the way they ought to be contributing to walkable urbanism. And there was a very interesting session at CNU. Actually, there were several of them devoted to this topic of what should be the design of these types. And then finally, I'll just mention all the stuff going on with code reform. And many of you planners probably are already in the midst of this stuff, is all the code changes that need to happen to allow middle housing to be built and sometimes to be preserved. There is a need to, in some neighborhoods, to upzone neighborhoods so that they allow middle housing types. There is a call to reduce fees, to have approvals be more automatic for middle housing types, to reduce and eliminate parking minimums is a very important thing. And all of this, couched in this idea that code reform might also be able to help with the whole design part of this equation. So, so there's a lot going on with this topic. A lot of people are doing fantastic things with this. And for example, I'm going to turn it over to our next panelist, or am I turning it back to you, Rolf?
Comes back to me at this point.
Okay.
Great. Thanks very much, Emily. That was terrific. I wanted to remind everyone and tell folks who are just tuning in now that you should type questions into the chat window, and we'll get to those in the Q&A session, which will follow the second presentation. I started out with a poll, and I've got another one queued up for you now. And so if you would, please take a look at these next two questions and tell us about how hard it would be and how to both get new housing built and to protect the housing that you already have in the middle housing stock. And I'll let this go for a minute or a little more, and I'll reveal the results. Okay, making good progress here. We're up at about 35 out of 44 people. Got to 40. And going once, going twice. Okay, I'm going to end the polling now and share the results. I find this really interesting that most of you who are attending are hopeful about getting this done. I wouldn't say optimistic, but it would be a tough fight, but it's possible to win. And the question is, what are the strategies to do that? That's excellent. And we had 6 people each at the ends of the spectrum, from impossible to fairly easy. And then the second question about the strength of community protections to avoid gentrification or abandonment of the existing stock. I'm seeing really the modal answer here is no protections, but moderate protections in some. And I'm wondering, maybe in the Q&A, we can come back to this issue of moderate protections and find out from one of the people who answered, yeah, we have moderate protections already, what your community is doing. So if you feel brave and like sharing, please maybe give your name in the chat window, and we will be ready to report on your protections. That would be great. Okay, thanks very much. That's it for the second poll, and now it's time for the presentation by Diane Limas and Heather from the Communities United. Thanks very much.
So again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diane Limas. I'm a longtime volunteer leader and board vice president for Communities United. As active participants and advocates in Chicago's housing market for 21 years, we at Communities United have been pioneers in the preservation of affordable housing. We address issues related to low-income tenants, preserving the identity of our neighborhoods, and addressing the diminishing stock of affordable housing in the city. CU organizes in the areas of Albany Park, Austin, Belmont-Cragen, Roseland, and West Ridge. The quandary of Chicago's small 2 to 4 unit buildings has received much media attention. Also, a lot of research has been done on this housing stock for over a decade. Yet very little by way of coordinated and comprehensive action. This needs to change. The iconic housing stock has long housed over a third of city's workers, working class residents, and has been a vital source of affordable housing, especially those that include basement apartments. Citywide, nearly 40% of the city's affordable stock is in these buildings with 2 to 4 units. Yet we have been losing these affordable homes for nearly a decade due to foreclosure, abandonment, flipping, and deconversion. The coronavirus pandemic threatens to accelerate the loss of this critical affording housing stock, with significant displacement consequences for Chicago vulnerable renters, low income, and households of color, threatening to future widen racial inequities in the city. The loss of our 2 to 4 unit rental buildings in Chicago's neighborhood is at the core of the city's affordable housing crisis. These buildings are primarily home to households of color. Over a third of the city's predominantly Black renters and roughly 60% of Latino renters live in our 2 to 4 unit buildings. This housing stock also presents a wealth generation opportunity, especially for neighborhood-based homeowners. If we care about Black and brown families in Chicago's disinvested as well as gentrifying neighborhoods, we need to protect this housing stock now. The patterns contributing to the loss of this housing stock not only point to the widening racial disparities that are contributing to mass displacement, but have also been amplified by the pandemic. Following the 2008 foreclosure crisis, nearly 1/3 of the 2 to 4 flat buildings in weaker housing market neighborhoods were affected by a foreclosure filing, contributing to mass displacement on the south and west sides, and the staggering loss of wealth in Black and brown communities. The economic impacts of COVID-19 threaten to further destabilize these disinvested communities. In gentrifying areas, 2 to 4 unit buildings are often swept up by cash investors, flipped and deconverted into single mansion type homes, displacing families from these homes, as well as resulting in a significant decline in the number of affordable units in the stronger housing markets. In low-cost neighborhoods, our 2 to 4s are being lost to foreclosure and abandonment. With over 500,000 people representing nearly half of all Chicago renters living in buildings with 2 to 4 units, the loss of this stock to foreclosure or speculation is devastating. Owners of these buildings, especially our small mom and pop owners, are extremely vulnerable to the economic impacts of COVID-19. With so many job losses and tenants struggling to pay rent, the loss of 25 to 50% of their income could push small landlords into financial peril and at the risk of foreclosure, further threatening the well-being of their tenants and further loss of this housing stock. The pandemic has ushered in unaccustomed actions from local, state, and federal governments to protect tenants and property owners alike. Yet, the vulnerability of the 2 to 4 unit housing stock is not sufficiently targeted in many of the solutions that are emerging. If we want to prevent a displacement disaster, protecting and preserving the 2 to 4 housing stock needs to be a pillar of any recovery strategy. I'd like to talk a little bit about Communities United leader-driven Boots on the Ground initiative started by volunteer leaders living in the community who wanted to stop the gentrification before it happened across their neighborhood. Excuse me. CU, Renters Organizing Ourselves to Stay, or Roots Initiative, was founded during the 2008 foreclosure crisis, bringing to light its hidden victims, low-income renters, who were being displaced from their 2 to 4 flat buildings as owners went into foreclosure. It was at this point that CU leaders brought together several partners to develop a preservation model that would prevent displacement of families and ensure long-term affordability. Through our Roots initiative, CU collaborated with key partners to preserve over 40 units of affordable family-size rental housing in our 2 to 4 unit buildings in the areas that were gentrifying. We look forward to working with other roots developers to create and preserve an additional 225 units of affordable housing that we have in the pipeline. The City of Chicago created a new preservation initiative modeled after our CU Roots initiative. It was called PAIR. It's called PAIR, Preserving Existing Affordable Rentals. Communities United and several other housing advocates petitioned the city to put $10 million in the 5-year housing plan for PAIR. So let's get to the Chicago Flats Initiative. Heather mentioned it in her presentation. The time is right for coordinated action and productive solutions to preserve the affordable 2 to 4 unit housing stock in Chicago neighborhoods, especially in the aftermath of the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Preservation of affordable housing is central to the health of individuals and communities and essential to the advancing of racial equity. To prevent a repeat of the devastation of the 2008 housing crisis from destabilizing and stripping wealth from Black and Brown communities, we have created the Chicago Flats Initiative, or CFI. With the Chicago Flats Initiative, enterprise community partners, neighborhood housing services, and Communities United, in collaboration with the other diverse stakeholders, propose a comprehensive strategy to preserve the 2 to 4 housing stock and support wealth generation opportunities in low to moderate income communities through capital, programmatic outreach, and policy solutions. By coordinating our efforts, Communities United and our partners, again, neighborhood housing services, enterprise community partners, should bring a pool of resources to the table that in the long run will present this unique opportunity to preserve the 2 to 4 flat housing stock. Thank you, and I'm open for any questions.
Okay, so my presentation is more of a lived experience testimony. So my name is Heather Barnes, which Gary introduced me at the beginning. Thank you, Gary. 2 years after I relocated to Chicago from New York City, I was on the hunt to find an apartment. I didn't know of any reputable real estate agency, so I started my search on Zillow. I'm not sure if any of you have searched for an apartment on Zillow, but one of the data fields you have to fill out is price range. Once I put my price range in for what I felt I could pay monthly for an apartment, listings of 2 to 4 flats started popping up, ranging from $15,000 to $100,000. At that time, there were more than 100 homes located across the south and west sides of Chicago. I became kind of curious about why there were so many houses at that price. Then I thought, what if I can purchase a fixer-upper with a price equivalent to 1 to 2 years rent for an apartment? I researched the areas the houses were located, compiled a list of 2 to 4 flats I wanted to view, and contacted a realtor to obtain the keys to the houses so I could view them. I saw several homes that only required cosmetic upkeep with no foundation or structural issues. I decided to purchase my home in the Rosen community for a couple of reasons. The house is located by Gwendolyn Brooks College Prep High School and has easy access to 3 bus lines. At the time, I did not drive. I have a 6-bedroom, 2-flat home that I purchased for $30,000, and it is worth $178,000 today. My home is more than 100 years old, only required cosmetic touch-ups to the outside of the house, and it's over 2,600 square feet. It's structurally sound, and even the home inspector was telling me during the inspection, this house is a steal. You better not let it go. The pricing of my house was so low because it was part of a HUD program to put families in homes and not investors. The stipulation of the $30,000 price point were I would have to be an owner-occupant for 1 year, then I could sell if I wanted to. Unfortunately, I did not find out this information until I was reviewing the paperwork with my real estate lawyer. Then I began to wonder if this housing stock of 2 to 4 flats that had been foreclosed upon due to the 2008 housing market crash was publicized, there would probably be more Black and Brown homeowners of 2 to 4 flats, which would provide affordable housing and help build generational wealth in the Black and Brown communities. That being said, I would like to review a few data points published by the Institute of Housing Studies at the poll, the 2 to 4 flat housing stock in Chicago and Black and Brown homeownership.
Can you hear me? I'm back on. Can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we are able to.
Great. Completely went dead. I apologize.
So this slide will show you the price point. The data. It kind of is throwing me off. As you can see by the stats provided, the loss of 2 to 4 flat housing stock due to foreclosure from 2005 to 2019 is higher than any other housing stock type in the city of Chicago. So for 2 to 4 flats, it's 29.8% 2 to 4 unit buildings for the citywide foreclosures. For the 2 to 4 flat housing stock loss for different reasons, which Emily kind of touched on in her presentation. Single family homes have replaced 2 to 4 flats, 4.75% from 2013 to 43.8% in 2019. It actually decreased. Total 2 to 4 flat housing stock disappeared from 13.4% in 2013 to 14.3% in 2019. The highest foreclosure activity have been in Black and Brown communities, so 29.5% in Black communities and 45.8% loss in Latinx communities. The challenges of the 2 to 4 low-cost market loss is really in the low cost, which is affordable housing for the lower income. The high levels of foreclosure, distress, vacancies, and abandonment means that our 2 to 4 units will be threatened and lost, either demolished or renovated or reconstructed. And this will bring us to our Chicago Flats Initiative. Our Chicago Flats Initiative, after reviewing the stats that were provided by IHS at the poll, further tells the story why this is important to preserve the 2 to 4 housing stock, and why the Chicago Flats Initiative collaborative main focus is the preservation of Chicago 2 to 4 flat housing, and to provide healthy and affordable housing for the most devastated communities in Chicago, which are the Black and Brown communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Diane, Heather. We now like to open things up for Q&A. We do have a couple of questions that have been dropped in the chat so far, so I'll start off with those. So our first one here is from Christy Barksdale Noble. So I see the middle housing rebirth as a correction to suburban sprawl beginning in the early 1950s and exclusionary housing of present day. Do you see middle housing as a tool to desegregate communities created by urban renewal such as Chicago?
Well, I'll just say that, the goal to diversify neighborhoods, you need to have is a mix of housing types. This is a very key kind of consideration, and it's one that zoning actively works against. Most zoning codes only allow it, and in many parts of Illinois, I'm sure, only allow single family housing. So whatever we can do to make sure that neighborhoods can have a diversity of housing types, that is essential for diversity and essential for promoting racial diversity in particular.
And if I can, and I think that, I agree with Emily. If we can preserve a housing stock that is affordable without subsidy, and we are in jeopardy of losing this housing stock, and DePaul illustrates how much of that housing stock we've lost recently. Different parts of the city have different reasons and for losing this housing stock. But I think we should work to create new middle housing and try to find it more, try to make it more affordable for new development, with this 2 to 4 unit in mind, and also to really go, start talking about preserving this housing stock, because once it's lost, it's no bringing it back unless we do new development. So to me, the combination of new development of our 2 to 4 unit housing stock is I mean, we have to build new, we need to build this new housing stock because we're losing it, but we also need to preserve it as well.
Great. Thank you so much both for those answers. So our next question here is from Cynthia Hoyle. So she says, we hear the following arguments from those who oppose building the higher density housing. So the arguments are without factual basis, but we have to counter them effectively. So the first one is the development will create more traffic and parking problems and is bad for our streets and air quality. 2, the families moving in will overpopulate schools. And then 3, the development will destroy the neighborhoods. Then she asks, what is the most effective way to address these concerns?
Hi, Cynthia. I knew Cynthia way back in the day. I think Rolf would be a good person to answer this, but I'll just say that the relationship between density and affordability is super complicated. And it isn't from what I've been seeing. I just was looking at a meta-analysis that had been done of all the studies trying to figure out the relationship between density and affordability. And it just depends, it depends on the building type, the location, the rules, everything else going on. But as far as trying to allow more development, I've been to many, community meetings where people are all up in arms about new development. And there are strategies out there, as Cynthia Hoyle knows, because I think she's very focused on these kinds of public engagement strategies. A lot of times it's about how is the development presented. And this is why I brought up the relationship with affordability. You can't just say this increase in density is going to make my neighborhood more affordable or less affordable, gentrified or not gentrified. There's more nuance and complexity with each one of these situations. But I think Rolf might have something very wise to say on this topic.
Oh boy, big build up there, Emily. Thanks a lot. I think what I would say is on the affordability question, it's not just a question of cost, it's also a question of tenure. Because even today, only 40% of Black families in the United States own their own homes. And that's down 7 or 8 percentage points from 2000. It's lower now, that home ownership rate is lower now than it was when the Fair Housing Act passed in 1969. So Heather's comments about the significance of the 2 to 4 stock for Black and Brown home ownership, I couldn't underscore that enough. If there are owner occupants who are coming into those neighborhoods and they are people of color, that's an opportunity they often don't get elsewhere. And also, if they have rental opportunities in their own homes, those rental units will also introduce almost by virtue of their being rentals, more diversity into a neighborhood. That's exactly what some of the neighbors that Cynthia is talking about are up in arms about. They really don't want the people who live there. They're not just, they may be scared about traffic. They may be concerned about streets and air quality, but really it's new renters in their neighborhoods a lot of the time. A lot of states are turning to higher levels of government so that local governments, where the so-called the neighborhood defenders, is a good book about that recently, where those folks are so much in control, taking away some of that control. And for the planners who want this to happen, it makes it more straightforward for those planners to say, my hands are tied. We really have to accommodate this now. It's just state law. So in Oregon, in some cities in Washington, and of course the famous case in Minneapolis, St. Paul, the citywide or even a statewide law or rule starts to pass so that it becomes policy that this is a housing type that is welcome in all neighborhoods. And so and then the question is, how do you get those kinds of policies adopted, it takes a coalition. You can't just talk people into it when they feel it's against their interests, but it is in the interests of everyone. And so this is a place in which planners can play a brokering and coalition building role in trying to put together enough voices from the community to get the rules changed at the local level and also at the state level. So those are my comments about the politics of getting this stuff done. A lot of the time, planners just want to talk to people until they are finally persuaded and they say, okay, yeah, this is a good idea. I think most of us know that those neighborhood defenders aren't going to stop unless there's some force that overrules or overrides them. Once they've had their say, of course, they need to have their say. So that's my 2 cents.
Great, thank you, Rolf and Emily. So our next question here, do you have some examples of communities that are doing well with missing middle housing? So are there any community codes that are allowing this type of development that you all would maybe refer people to?
There are, and there are good resources out there. I would go to the missingmiddlehousing.com website that I mentioned, and they do have a section under resources that's all about codes. The Form-Based Codes Institute, there's a lot of intersection between what missing middle housing advocates are aiming for and form-based codes. And it's the form-based code that is supporting missing middle housing. So the Form-Based Codes Institute has a lot of resources aimed and targeted specifically at missing middle as well.
Well, I think too, I know that Emily said something about the accessory dwelling units, that they might not be really the answer to, protecting our 2 to 4 unit buildings. But Communities United leaders work very hard and push very hard to get the accessory dwelling unit passed in a pilot with the main purpose of creating another unit of affordable housing in our 2 to 4, specifically in our 2 to 4 unit housing stock. Or if they're renting an unsafe or unhealthy apartment, to use funds from the accessory dwelling ordinance that are available to make healthy and safe that unit of affordable housing. And our thoughts behind it were, if by creating an accessory dwelling unit into 2 to 4 would prevent that homeowner into going into foreclosure by that extra source of income coming into in for them to help pay their mortgage or help them pay the taxes or just do general repairs, if that would prevent him from selling to a speculator or going into foreclosure, that would be worth it. And with that new unit of rental, as an accessory dwelling unit in a 2 to 4, would that make it more desirable for people looking to buy 2 to 4 flats, right? And save that stock in that way. So this is the thought behind CU's reason for being so involved in the accessory dwelling unit ordinance. So we're always looking for ways to preserve the 2 to 4 unit housing stock. Creating that extra unit, if that makes that happen, well, we think that's a good thing. And another thing, when people come into a neighborhood because it's gentrifying and turn a 2-flat into a single-family home, the things we don't talk about enough is that it displaces the families that live in that 2 to 4 flat home. These are people that lived in the neighborhood a long time and went through the bad parts of living in that neighborhood, right? When it wasn't gentrifying and wealthy people weren't moving in. So we have to think about that as well. We can't keep losing this stock and displacing people from their homes, especially in our 2 to 4 flat stock.
I just have a quick plug for the city of Bloomington. They recently adopted a new zoning district to help protect some of the missing middle housing they have in the neighborhood surrounding their downtown. So they do have a lot of this existing stock, and there was some policy that was established several decades ago, really, that saw this neighborhood as being converted or redeveloped as much higher density multifamily than what it is currently, which is a mix of small scale multifamily buildings and single family homes and duplexes. So the new policy and new zoning ordinance that was recently adopted allows for the legal conversion of large historic single family homes to multiple units to help preserve those homes and extend their economic life. So I would recommend taking a look at Bloomington's R3B district if you're interested in a good example of code that works to preserve that missing middle stock.
Interesting.
Great.
Carrie, I think you've got a...
Yeah, so and after my question, Emily, you're free to ask a question to Heather and Diane. So my question is more specific to legislation and kind of springboarding off of the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, which Diane was discussing. So do you think Illinois should pass legislation to make new middle housing easier to build? If so, what would some legislative approaches be to doing that?
Who's that question for?
That was for Diane.
Okay. Well, I think local government regulations have driven up the cost of building new homes. We know that, right? Zoning laws increase the cost of new development. They take the height of a building, the minimum lot size, and parking requirements all increase the cost of housing, putting home ownership out of reach for many of our working families. But now, because of COVID, construction materials are in short supply, contributing to the high cost of building supplies, right? Because apartment buildings with more units are the most affordable form of housing, be honest, developers are less inclined to build 2 to 4 unit housing. I think to even this playing field, developers should establish a new federal income tax credit just for the development of 2 to 4s and for their preservation. And of course, always looking, to reform new zoning codes, because zoning codes really put a lot of developers don't want to build to 2 to 4 because of the main reason is because of all the zoning restrictions that go along with that. So yeah, I think there should be more legislation and more thought behind the 2 to 4 unit housing stock, and also the preservation of that stock.
Great. Thanks, Diane. Emily, did you want to follow that question?
Yeah, I just I wanted to ask Diane and Heather what they think we all could be doing to help the cause. You've got an audience of 40-something planners here. Like, what could we be doing? I guess it's more specifically about Chicago. We're all kind of on the same page. We're sort of clamoring for, we need to protect these housing units. I, in particular, am just so disgusted and outraged about the conversion to single family homes that I see in Lincoln Park. These 6 units, 4 unit buildings getting converted to McMansions, right next to to a transit stop. That to me is just so unjust and horrible. And but I wondered, what are the political realities here of actually doing something to get ordinances in place that would, make this happen, protect, these middle housing units, and what can we do in a practical kind of way?
Well, I think as far as in a couple areas in the city, in Pilsen and in Logan Square, there have been pilot ordinances out there. Like in those areas, you can't deconvert, and if you want to deconvert, you have to pay like a $50,000 deconversion fee, and that's something new, and it's only it's not citywide. So that's something we should be thinking about, where in all parts of the city in regards to deconversion. And there are some parts, it's my understanding, on the southwest sides where where they're thinking twice before they demolish a home, right? So the city is giving more thought to that. But, I'm just going to give an example, and this is how bad it is. On the block where I live in Albany Park that is starting to gentrify, there's a house on the block that in 2015, a person bought it for $215,000. That's in 2015. In 2019, it was from 2015 to 2019 that they started the deconversion of a 3-flat into a single family home. In 2019, that house sold for $779,000. Okay. So what effects did that have on the rest of us people that live on the block? My property taxes nearly doubled. They nearly doubled. So not only are we, displacing people, but this how the entire neighborhood loses its character, loses its diversity, because who could live on that block anymore? If you're like me, a senior citizen on a fixed income, how do we pay our doubling of our property taxes? So, and going back, we need to elected, what I noticed in the last couple of years is that people are starting to think about renters as being something that we don't want in our neighborhoods. Renters are not good for our neighborhood. And I'm hearing more and more about this, especially from our elected officials. I don't want a 2 to 4 flat. I want a single family home. I don't want renters because they can destroy my community. So renters are really getting a bad rap. And I'm not saying that some renters don't deserve that. I hear the other side of the story too. But we need our elected officials to really see that they're not going to build their way out of, with new construction, out of the affordable housing crisis. They're not going to do that. You need to preserve the housing stock that we have. We need to be thinking, like with our Chicago Flats initiative, how do we connect our 2 to 4s to home ownership, right? How do we talk about that? How does NHS get involved with their loan programs? So working all together, I'm very excited about our new initiative and moving forward. I hope that answered your question, Emily. But pushing our elected official to create policies to keep our neighborhoods diverse.
Mm-hmm. I guess I just, being an academic person, I'm not well versed in how to connect with aldermen to really make them do the right thing, like letter writing campaigns and picketing, or I don't know what needs to happen, but it's like all these different groups are out there, APA Illinois and CNU Illinois and your amazing organizations. And sometimes I feel like we need to band together on this issue and move forward as a bigger group. And I don't know what the logistics of such an operation are, but that was my thought.
Okay.
So, Emily, just to add to Diane, for the Chicago Flats Initiative, our group is, getting much bigger. So some of the members are like NHS, IHS, where we get our data from. They're part of the collaborative, Enterprise, and also Elevate Energy. So this collaborative is really forming to cover a holistic, well-rounded attack on preserving the 2 to 4 flats, whether it's getting loan products, grant products, saving the troubled homes from being demolished. So if you kind of look out for Chicago Flats and what we have to bring going forward, soon we'll have a webinar in August. We'll make sure we invite everyone so you can get more detail about that collaborative, because we're also trying to partner with their peer program also. So we're really trying to get a well-rounded way of preserving 2 to 4 flats, creating Black and brown home ownership, and just holding on to the neighborhoods, right? Because our housing stock in Chicago, majority is 100 years old, right? So if we don't save it, they're going to tear it down and have those mega mini mansions that you see in Logan Square, or I'm not sure, I forgot what neighborhood, but that's what we're also facing in Roseland, right? So Roseland is a gentrifying neighborhood because of the Mayor's Southwest Invest initiative, and investors are coming in, and now you see these brand new homes popped up. They're looking amazing, right? Standing next to a 100-year-old home that you can renovate, remodel, make it healthy and happy and safe for our communities. So, just one.
Well, thank you, and keep us in the loop, please.
Yeah, these are very similar to conversations Emily and I were just having recently. So it's actually very exciting to discuss this. Jacky, did you have another question from the chat box?
I do. All right. So the next one, is there a target mix of single family, missing middle, and larger multifamily buildings that a community should go for to encourage diversity? It's like a target mix.
Well, so I'll just butt in on that. I think there should be diverse housing types no matter where you are, even out in rural areas. But as you move into the city is kind of a transect thing. The kind of mix you have is going to be different. So depending, if you're in the center of a downtown, you have a certain kind of mix, and I'm talking urban form building type here. But I think every area should have a mix of types. Now, what is that mix? There's different things you could base that on. You could look at your whole regional profile, and it could be the whole region could have, we have 30% single family housing, we have 20% high-rise apartments, we have, whatever percentages we have. And then you could say, well, our target is that every neighborhood would have that same kind of diversity profile. Every neighborhood should have 30, 20, whatever it is, the mix. So that's one approach. There's different ways of thinking about what your target should be, but I appreciate the question because I think it's absolutely a thought thing, experiment or whatever, a thought process that planners should be doing for every neighborhood, for their community, and for every neighborhood. What should our diversity profile be?
Building off of that, we've worked in communities when we're updating their subdivision ordinances to establish a requirement for a mix of housing types within new residential subdivisions. So that really would be based off of the sort of profile of the community, just like Emily was saying. So if we have 50% of homes are single family detached, and we have 20% duplexes, and then 30% multifamily, the new subdivisions would be required to have that same mix. So that's a great way to require new neighborhoods to have that diversity within them.
Great.
So our next question is about TIF districts. So TIF districts have been established where most of the little bit of middle housing in River Forest is located. So exactly what can be done to prevent new developments in these TIF districts from eliminating missing middle housing, which is affordable to households of modest incomes? Require one-for-one replacement of affordable units within any new developments that demolish middle housing via incentivized inclusionary zoning. What can be done?
I could answer based on my knowledge of California's departed redevelopment laws. It was redevelopment in California was thrown out by the legislature in 2013. But until that point, the state had ramped up the requirements for replacement housing and also for new housing, so that they do have a one-for-one requirement embedded within their redevelopment law, or they did under the previous provisions. And also any new housing that got built had to be at least 25% affordable. And so they had mandatory inclusionary zoning. So those are two provisions of the law that protected the housing stock and the people who lived in the neighborhood sometimes after a lot of controversy over a lot of early redevelopment. It also requires 20% or required 20% of the tax increment that every district generates to be set aside for use in affordable housing. So it can't all go just to the infrastructure payments or to the general fund or to the school district. Unfortunately, that 20% of the increment has to be set aside into an affordable housing fund that then would have to be spent within the jurisdiction. It can't be sent somewhere else to take care of it. So there are examples of these laws, and those laws are won over long periods of time by people who really are fighting for them hard and making sure that they pass. And something similar to that kind of a long-term campaign would probably be necessary in Illinois before anything like that passed, just given the stakes of TIF districts here.
There was a response from one of the attendees here in the chat. So it's from Jean Lindwell. They say, in response to Dan's question, TIF funds can be used to support housing rehabilitation. That's been done in a few Chicago TIFs and is being discussed in some suburbs.
And this provision in California simply makes that mandatory. It's not just an option that you can do if it seems expedient or like it fits into your other plans.
All right, so our next question, since walkability is a big component of missing middle housing, should new construction of this type of housing be located around commercial corridors?
Well, that's a bit of a tricky question because there are too many commercial corridors due to zoning, back in the day in the 1920s when they first zoned out many cities, they just wanted all this commercial area to happen to try to generate more revenue. So what we see in a lot of places, and in Chicago in particular, the commercial corridors are really struggling, and there needs to be a bit more consolidation of, where are our nodes of commercial activity, neighborhoods supporting commercial activity. And then I would think that, yes, around those commercial nodes, you would want to have definitely higher intensity housing and middle housing for sure. That's an important part of walkability. I guess I'm just arguing that you wouldn't necessarily you'd want to really think about where to target the middle housing types and where they could be most successful. Diane, you have something to add to that?
No, I think you're right, especially if you're thinking about having walkability spaces, right? You need to give that a lot of thought about where you want this housing built. Because otherwise, if you're going to be building it in a commercial space, it's not going to leave you any room to do what you want to do, then definitely we don't want that. We wouldn't agree to that.
Mm-hmm.
But Emily, you did say before that all neighborhoods, ought to have a mix of housing type, at least in principle. And so there's a difference maybe between where you focus your efforts versus where you allow middle housing. So can you maybe elaborate on that idea a little bit? Because I just want to make sure that the nuance of what you're saying doesn't get lost.
Yeah, good point. I mean, I guess the question was more about the walkability aspect and missing middle housing, and whether, I keep saying missing, I can't get rid of that word missing. It's just in my brain. And this relationship between middle housing and walkability is super, super strong. I'm just saying that doesn't necessarily mean we want to start putting housing types near all the commercial corridors. We just need to target it better. This is sort of a thing that's really been on my mind about Chicago and all the commercial areas that are struggling. And I was just working on this past quarter on Milwaukee Avenue. That like 75% of the businesses are closed, and it's really tragic. So I was just kind of conflating two different things there, but just the need to be targeted about where that relationship between commercial corridor activation via middle housing is really being set as a priority.
Emily, one thing you can focus on is when you're doing a commercial corridor, like for Chicago, Michigan Avenue on Roseland, is start doing like mixed housing, right? So where you have your storefronts at the bottom and maybe the apartments on top. So you get an equal balance of both, right? So maybe that's a direction to look in.
Yeah, good point. And that's part of middle housing too, right? The apartments over the stores. Yeah.
All right, so our next question. For new middle housing in the suburbs, how do you incentivize developers to do the right thing? We typically see developers who want to increase density above the maximums permitted, eliminate green space or amenities for residents, and use cheap building materials to maximize their profits. Planners and local residents want a middle housing development that blends with the surrounding single-family homes that creates a nice, desirable development. So you all are thinking, I can just jump in real quick with what we did in Bloomington for their R3B district. So we established specific design standards for new development of this type of middle housing. So if that was duplexes or smaller scale multifamily buildings, very specific requirements for building materials, and then also some form-based standards as well to ensure that the higher density housing was in keeping with the character of the single-family housing it might be next door to. So the types of setbacks that would be required for a single family home would then also apply to the duplex or attached home. Things like requiring the parking lots for multifamily buildings to be located in the rear of the building rather than in the front, so that you have that relationship to the street be similar for single family homes, duplexes, and multifamily homes. So I think we can really look at design standards for, a form-based type of design standard to ensure that this new type of middle housing does have that same character as a single family home, so that it's not as perhaps scary for neighbors to have that introduced in their communities.
And I think like in areas of opportunity, you're not going to find a vacant land to build new, build new development. You're just not going to find it in areas that are gentrifying. There's very little vacant land. Where on the east and west side, you're going to find, a lot of vacant land. So you have to keep that in mind as well. Developers aren't going to build if they don't meet their profit margin. They're just not going to build. When Communities United was interviewing RITS developers to work with us on our RITS initiative, that was one of the things all the developers said. Hey, you're talking about, if you want to build to scale, you have to purchase maybe 10 2 to 4 flats. And when you do that, as opposed to buying a courtyard building with 25 units, you're looking at replacing 25 roofs, right? And replacing heating units for 25 different houses, right? Where if you have a courtyard building that has 35 units, you might have trouble with the roof and maybe one heating system. So not having the space to build, the land to build is important. It's an important factor to keep in mind as well. Where are people going to build our new 2 to 4s if we don't have vacant land to build them on?
Yeah, I'll just say the importance too of getting more people trained in how to do development. There's a whole movement out there called the Incremental Development Alliance, and this is about not being beholden all the time to big developers, or even developers that are used to working in the 10 or more unit building range. Get individuals, property owners, tooled up so that they know how to do a basic pro forma. They know how to do some basic lending, activity to get some money. And then it's just comforting to me to know that there's a whole organization out there devoted to training regular folks, to learn how to develop their properties. So that's getting a little bit off topic of what the original question was, but wanted to throw that in there. The other thing I wanted to mention is the importance, I think, of having a vision for the community, like the neighborhood. What do you want to see happen? And we've always, as planners, we got this in Planning 101, the importance of a vision, a community vision, people coming together where they have a collective idea about where they want this neighborhood to go. And that's so essential. And sometimes we lose sight of the need to do that, to frame all this other stuff, the zoning, the lending, the going after developers, the political action you know, it really starts with people coming together and having that vision. And I think that often people, you know, maybe we don't have time to do it the way we should. My 2 cents.
I do think that, like, you know, communities, groups like Communities United, and there's a lot of them, a lot of good grassroots community organizations out there. But you need to, you know, our elected officials need to pay more attention to our organizations like Communities United, because we truly do roots on the ground organizing, boots on the ground organizing. We talk to the tenants. In fact, when we first started talking about the deconversions, when we went to DePaul and said, "Do you have any statistics on deconversions?" Their reply was, "We don't have proof that that's really happening." Right? And then we were able to say, "Well, come into our neighborhood and we will take you for a walk in our neighborhood and we'll point out, you know, where this is happening, how much of this is happening." And it started, you know, but it's from the boots on the ground organizing that is going to make a difference to our elected officials. But if elected officials and other policy groups don't give organizations like CU the respect that they deserve, it's never gonna be right. It's never, because our elected officials, our legislators will continue to create policy that don't even come close to addressing the problem, because they don't have the lived experiences of people that are going through and living in these neighborhoods are going through.
All right, so we've got one last question before we wrap things up. This one's from Scott. So this is a question for Diane. So given the market forces that are causing the conversions of the 2 to 4 unit housing to single family dwellings, a prohibition is likely to constitute a taking and be found invalid by the courts. What can a municipality do without triggering that issue?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I'm going to turn it over to Emily. I'm going to turn that right over to Emily.
I'm turning it over to Ralph.
Well, I think various court rulings, and I don't know what it is in Illinois, but there have been a lot of court rulings that have said that if you have a valid public purpose, there's a lot of regulation that you can do as long as it doesn't completely eliminate the economic use of a property. So the zoning doesn't really give people a right in most states to do anything that they want. And Dan Lauber just chimed in on the chat saying that he is confident that would not constitute a taking despite the latest Supreme Court decision. So, and you could sort of think about this as saying, well, you know, imagine a neighborhood that was zoned for 2 to 4s and it gets down zoned to just 1 unit. Communities do that all the time. And that passes scrutiny, even though it's definitely a taking. I mean, it's a diminution of value in the neighborhood on the property side. So that would be my sense, and I'm glad that the registered attorney agrees with me on that one. So thanks, Dan.
It's a really interesting question, though, because is that a taking when you're prohibiting people from downscale, you know, downzoning their property or reducing the number of units on a lot? That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that one before.
Great. Thank you everyone so much for your information, and to our participants, the questions you've asked. But the content on this session was just great. Thank you so much to Diane Limas and Heather Barnes with Communities United, Emily Talon, representing probably a lot of different hats, but as Professor of Urbanism at University of Chicago, Ralph Pendahl, also Director of Urban Planning at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and also as well to Jacky Wells with Jose Levine, and to our partnering organizations, APA Illinois and CNU Illinois. We'd love to all have you involved with our programming, whether that's APA Illinois or CNU Illinois. So I know we'll be in touch after this session. We'll have some email addresses to contact and follow up from. So thank you all. And APA Illinois or Brandon, Paula, do you have any follow-up?
No, thank you very much.
All right. Well, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day and hope to see you around soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey, everyone.
Yeah.